The champagne was already poured when I got to my seat. Nothing about the room felt rushed. People moved in that slow, polished way they do when they know the night is going their way. Servers in black carried trays like they were carrying glass art, not drinks. Someone behind me whispered a joke, and a few soft laughs came and went. I smoothed the skirt of the deep green dress Michael asked me to buy last week. Not because I loved it, because he said it looked right for photos. The boardroom at Harrow and Slate sat at the top of the building like a showroom. Tall windows, city lights, a chandelier that threw clean white reflections across the table. Everything looked expensive in a way that didn't try to be warm. I sat in the front row where I was supposed to sit. I kept my smile small and steady, the kind you learn after a while. Supportive, neutral, not asking for attention. Michael stepped up to the front with the confidence of someone who had practiced the walk 100 times. Midnight blue tux, crisp cuff, that familiar look he wore when he was about to be praised. And then it happened. The chairman read out the final confirmation. A few people nodded like they'd expected it all along. Someone started clapping. It spread quickly, filling the room until the applause became its own thing, loud enough to hide everything else. Michael had just been confirmed as CEO of the largest logistics group in the region, the kind of company with ports, fleets, contracts that could swing markets, the kind of title people chase for decades. I watched him accept it like it belonged to him. My hands clapped too, lightly, because that's what you do in that moment. My palms barely touched, just enough to match the room. I kept my eyes up. I didn't fidget. I didn't look down at my lap or at the floor. Then the applause softened. The sound fell away in layers, like a curtain lowering. Michael didn't reach for his glass. He reached for a thick envelope. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't white. It was heavy and tan, like something you send when you don't care how it looks, only what it does. A man beside him, his attorney, held it like a prop that had been waiting for its cue. Michael glanced down at it, then lifted his head toward the microphone. "Before we begin this next chapter," he said, calm and even, "I need to settle one last piece of business." His voice was steady, not angry, not emotional, almost rehearsed. He took 2 steps forward, and I realized he was coming toward me. The room went quiet in the way that makes you hear small things. The soft rub of fabric, the faint hum from the lights, the tiny clink of someone's ring against their glass. Michael stopped right in front of my chair. He didn't crouch. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't try to make it private. He dropped the envelope into my lap. The weight of it made the silk pull against my knees. It felt heavier than paper should feel. Then he said my name into the microphone. "Claire." I looked up at him. I didn't move my hands. I didn't reach for the envelope yet. I just looked. His expression didn't shift. "You helped me get here," he said. "And I don't deny that." He paused, just long enough for the room to stay perfectly still. "But now that I'm here, I don't need the arrangement anymore." The word arrangement landed like it had been chosen carefully. He tilted his head, barely, and finished in the same calm tone. "Those are the divorce papers. Sign them now." A few people inhaled, quietly, like they didn't want anyone to notice. Someone behind me adjusted in their chair. The leather made a soft squeak that felt too loud. On Michael's left, his mother leaned forward with a sharp little laugh. Not big, not theatrical, just a tight sound that carried. "Honestly," she said, and her diamonds caught the light as she moved her hand. "Did you think you'd sit at this table forever?" Her voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. The room was listening. "You got lucky," she went on, looking at me like I was a stain. "Sign the papers, and don't drag this out in front of people who matter." I felt my face stay calm. It wasn't a decision I made in that second. It was a habit. 10 years of learning how to keep my expression from becoming a headline. I looked down at the envelope. The top page was already prepared. Tabs on the side. Signature lines flagged like they expected speed. The language was clean and aggressive in that way lawyers can do. There was also a non-disclosure agreement and a waiver, not just a divorce, an exit. Michael leaned down, close enough that only I could hear him. "Don't make this weird," he said softly, still smiling for the room. "You've had a good run. Be smart." I breathed in through my nose. Slow. I could smell his cologne, something sharp and expensive that used to feel familiar and now didn't. I glanced across the first row of board members. A few looked away, eyes suddenly fixed on the table, like they'd misplaced something there. One man watched me with open curiosity, as if this was a demonstration and he was taking notes. No one spoke. The silence pressed in, and I realized something simple. They weren't going to help. They were going to witness. I picked up the pen. It was a black fountain pen Michael carried because it looked good in photos. I knew the weight of it. I knew the way the cap clicked when you posted it. I'd bought it for him years ago when he got his first real promotion. My hand didn't shake. I signed. Page 1, then the next, then the next. The sound of the pen across paper was quiet, but in that room, it felt like the only sound left. When I finished, I slid the pages back into the envelope and set it on the small table beside my chair. I looked up at Michael. "There," I said. My voice stayed even. "It's done." His mouth lifted in something close to relief. "Good," he said, and then, without lowering his voice, "Security will escort you out." He said it like he was calling for a car. I didn't stand right away. I let 1 second pass, then another. Not because I was frozen, because I was choosing the pace. I wasn't going to scramble. Then my phone vibrated against my thigh. One short buzz. I didn't move fast. I didn't make it obvious. My eyes stayed on Michael for a moment longer. Then I lowered my gaze and lifted my phone just enough to see the screen. A message. The sender was 2 letters I hadn't seen in years. RV. My fingers went cold, but my face stayed the same. The text was simple. "Don't leave. Stay seated. He's on his way." I stared at that line for a second longer than I meant to, because there are some things your mind refuses to accept on the first read. I put the phone face down in my lap. Then I waited. I stayed seated. Not because I didn't understand what was happening, and not because I was hoping someone would change their mind. I stayed seated because the message told me to, and because the room had already decided I was supposed to move on their timing. If I stood up fast, it would look like panic. If I argued, it would look like a scene. So I did the one thing I knew how to do in rooms like that. I held still and watched. Michael's attorney stepped closer, ready to gather the envelope like it was a finished transaction. Michael looked toward the security guard posted near the door, the one with the earpiece and the posture that suggested he'd rather be somewhere else. "Let's keep this professional," Michael said, still in that same controlled tone, like he was managing an agenda item. His mother, Vivian, sat back in her chair with a satisfied look that didn't quite reach her eyes. She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist slowly, deliberately. A small performance of comfort. I kept my hands relaxed in my lap. The phone was face down under my fingers, warm from my skin. For a moment, I focused on small things instead of the bigger picture. The soft whistle of the HVAC, the faint scent of lemon polish on the table, the way the chandelier reflected tiny points of light on the glass wall behind the chairman's seat. Then my mind did what it always did when something went wrong. It started sorting, step by step, without emotion. What had just been handed to me wasn't a normal divorce packet. It wasn't "we grew apart" paperwork. It was a full containment package, non-disclosure, waiver of any claim to marital assets, confidentiality clauses that would follow me into the next decade, language designed to make me sound like a liability instead of a person. Michael wasn't asking me to leave. He was trying to erase the last 10 years. And the strange part was, I wasn't surprised. Not truly. There had been signs, quiet ones, but consistent. The way he started taking calls in the hallway instead of the kitchen. The way he stopped asking my opinion on things he used to bring home like homework. The way he used to say we when he spoke about the company, and then, somewhere along the way, switched to I. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. When I met Michael, he wasn't a CEO in waiting. He wasn't polished. He wasn't the man in a tuxedo under a chandelier. He was a department manager who stayed late because he was terrified of falling behind. He had a good smile and a tight schedule and a kind of hunger that made people assume he must be brilliant. He also had debt. More than he admitted at first. It wasn't just credit cards. It was old loans tied to a family property his father had leveraged before he died. There were late payments, penalties, pressure from people who didn't send emails. The kind of pressure that shows up. Michael told me all of this gradually, always framed as temporary, always framed as, I'm handling it. I believed him, at least in the beginning. Not because I was naive, but because I loved him, and because I understood what it feels like to want to outrun a past you didn't choose. I had a small inheritance from my mother's side, not a fortune, just enough to matter if used carefully. I didn't bring it up as a bargaining chip. I used it the way you use a fire extinguisher. You don't announce it, you just put out the problem before it spreads. I paid off the most urgent piece first, the one that was going to turn into a lawsuit. Then I negotiated the rest through a family attorney who didn't ask questions and didn't like attention. Michael called it support. He called it love. And maybe it was, but it was also investment. Because I wasn't only keeping him afloat, I was building something with him, quietly. While he slept, I rewrote his presentations, not to make them prettier, to make them safer, less ego, more numbers, less promise, more plan. While he rehearsed speeches in the mirror, I listened from the hallway and made notes on what sounded forced, what sounded like he was trying too hard, what would land wrong with the kind of people he wanted to impress. He started winning meetings. He started getting invited to dinners. He started getting called a rising leader. And if I'm honest, I was proud, not of the title, of the progress, of the structure. Then came Vivian. She didn't start with shouting. She didn't need to. The first time I met her, she gave me a hug that lasted half a second too long and said, "Oh, you're sweet." The word sweet sounded like a category. Over time, her comments sharpened. Little things. My shoes. The fact that I didn't know the names of certain families. The fact that I didn't grow up vacationing in places she considered normal. She never insulted me directly. She did something worse. She made it sound like the world simply agreed. Michael didn't defend me. At first, he avoided the moments. He'd pretend he didn't hear. He'd squeeze my hand under the table like a small apology. Then he started laughing along. Not hard laughter, not cruel laughter, just enough to show he was on the right side of her approval. That was when I realized what this was. Vivian didn't dislike me because I was wrong for him. She disliked me because I knew too much. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically and financially. I knew that Michael's confidence was built on a foundation that had been repaired in the dark. And I knew something else, too. The company's biggest turning point, the moment everyone credited to Michael's vision, hadn't happened by accident. 3 years earlier, Harrow and Slate had almost collapsed during a merger attempt. I remember it clearly because the nights were long and the stress sat in the house like smoke. Michael would come home with his tie loosened, not speaking at first. He'd pour a drink and stare at the wall like he could see numbers there. Contracts were slipping, cash flow was tight. A key investor was threatening to walk. People at the top were quietly positioning themselves to survive the fall. Michael said he had it under control. He didn't. So I did what I'd always done. I worked with what I had. There were accounts my father left behind, not in my personal name, not in a way anyone could trace easily. He'd always been careful like that, even with me. He used to say, "If you don't want trouble, don't leave your name on the door." My father, Russell Vale, was not a man who liked spotlights. He wasn't the kind of person you'd see in magazine profiles, but people in certain circles knew him anyway. Not from photos, from outcomes. When he died 7 years ago, it was reported as an accident. A private plane over the Atlantic. No survivors. A clean ending the public could understand. I grieved him the way you grieve a complicated person. Quietly. Privately. Without a lot of public ceremony. And I did something else. I let the world believe the story was over. Because I wanted my own life. I wanted a marriage that wasn't a transaction. I wanted to be Claire, not a surname people whispered about. So I kept my head down. I played the supportive wife. I let Vivian think I was small. I let Michael believe he was self-made. I even wore the dress he picked tonight because it kept things smooth. But 3 years ago, during that merger crisis, I used one of the accounts my father left behind. I moved money in through channels that looked like standard corporate lifelines. I arranged a quiet capital injection, timed to arrive right when it would stabilize the company without anyone noticing the hand that placed it there. I also made a few strategic calls, not emotional calls, practical ones. A warning to a partner who was about to walk, a nudge to a competitor to focus elsewhere, a leak, carefully phrased, that made one investor afraid to be the first to bail. It worked. The merger recovered. The board praised Michael. Articles were written about his steady leadership. People applauded him at conferences. He started believing it. And once a person starts believing their own myth, they stop looking at the scaffolding holding them up. That's what had happened with Michael. Now, in this boardroom, watching him stand there under the chandelier, I could see the final stage of it. He wasn't just divorcing me. He was cutting off what he thought was a weak attachment. He didn't understand it was structural. The security guard took a step forward. Michael's attorney lifted his hand slightly, like a conductor guiding the next motion. And Vivian leaned toward Michael's shoulder, saying something softly that made him smile. I stayed still. I kept my posture. I kept my face calm. Inside, my mind was already moving through questions. Who sent the message? How did they know I was about to be escorted out? What did "he's on his way" actually mean? My phone buzzed again, one short vibration against my leg. I didn't flip it over immediately. I waited 2 breaths, then slid it up just enough to read the screen without anyone nearby noticing. Another message from RV. Only 4 words this time. Look at the door. So I did. And I watched the double doors at the back of the boardroom, the ones that had been closed all evening, as the handle shifted slightly, like someone on the other side had just placed a hand on it. The handle moved again. Not a dramatic shake, just a small, controlled turn, like whoever was outside didn't believe in making announcements. For a second, nothing else happened. The board members were still watching Michael. Some of them were smiling the way people smile when they're relieved a messy thing is being removed from their evening. The security guard had shifted his weight forward, ready to act. Michael hadn't looked back yet. He was still facing me, posture tall, mouth set in a thin line of satisfaction. "Claire," he said again, quieter this time, for me. "Let's go." I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on him for half a beat, then I let my gaze drift past his shoulder, toward the doors. That's when Michael finally noticed the change in the room. Not the handle, the atmosphere. A few people had turned their heads. One of the assistants near the wall straightened abruptly, like she'd recognized a sound. Even Vivian paused, her smile slipping for the first time tonight. The double doors opened. Not gently. They swung in with force, the heavy wood hitting the stopper hard enough to echo. It wasn't chaos, it was authority, the kind that doesn't apologize for noise. 2 men stepped in first, both in plain dark suits, moving quickly, but not running. Their eyes scanned the room in a practiced way, checking corners, exits, faces. One of them spoke into a small mic at his collar without looking like he was speaking at all. Then more came behind them. Not a crowd, a formation. I watched the security guard near the front hesitate. He didn't know whether to intercept or step aside. He glanced toward Michael, waiting for an instruction, but Michael's face had tightened. He was trying to decide what this meant, and the delay told me he didn't like not knowing. The group stopped just inside the door, and then a man walked in behind them. He didn't rush, he didn't scan, he didn't need to. He was older than the last time I saw him, silver at the temples, posture slightly different. He used a cane, but not in a fragile way, more like a metronome. Each step landed with a measured tap against the marble floor. His suit was simple and expensive, no bright patterns, no obvious branding. The kind of tailoring you only notice if you've spent time around people who don't shop the way normal people shop. He didn't look at Michael first. He looked straight at me, and the room changed. There are moments when you can feel everyone's attention snap to the same point, like a compass needle finding north. That's what it felt like. Conversations died. Glasses stopped moving. Chairs stopped creaking. The chairman stood up so quickly his chair scraped hard against the floor. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. The man with the cane took another step forward, then another, and I realized my breathing had been shallow for the last minute. I let it deepen, quietly. My phone stayed face down in my lap, but I didn't need it anymore. I knew who this was, the man who was supposed to be dead. My father, Russell Vale. He stopped at my row, close enough that the scent of his cologne, something faint and clean, reached me. He didn't look at the board. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at Vivian. He reached down and, with the smallest motion, brushed a loose strand of hair away from my forehead, like I was 12 again and he was fixing something before a photo. "You stayed too long," he said quietly. Not into the microphone, just to me. His voice was lower than I remembered, rougher at the edges, but it was still his. I didn't stand immediately. I looked up at him from my chair, steady. "I had to see it clearly," I said. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if that answer matched what he already knew. Behind him, one of the men in a dark suit stepped to the side and held position near the door. Another moved along the wall, watching the room the way you watch water that might turn rough. The chairman finally found his voice. "Mr. Vale," he said, and the way he said it, like he was tasting something impossible, told me this wasn't a case of mistaken identity. We were told." Russell lifted his gaze to the chairman. Not rude, just cold and direct. "You were told what you were meant to believe," he said. The chairman swallowed. Vivian's hand tightened on the armrest of her chair. I noticed it because her jewelry shifted and caught the light. She was suddenly very still, like she was trying to become invisible. Michael's face had gone pale. He had recognized Russell too. Not from family stories, from boardroom rumors, from the kind of name that doesn't circulate among normal people. Michael's attorney took a small step back. A reflex. Michael tried to speak, but the first sound that came out wasn't a word. It was a breath. "What is this?" he managed. The microphone caught it. Russell didn't answer him yet. He leaned slightly toward me again, the cane steady in his hand. "I told you," he said under his breath. "That man wasn't worth the fabric he asked you to wear." I didn't react outwardly. I just let my fingers uncurl in my lap. A slow release I hadn't realized I was holding. Russell straightened and turned toward the front of the room. His eyes moved across the board members like he was taking inventory. Not hurried, not impressed. Then he looked at Michael. Finally. Michael held the divorce envelope in one hand like it was suddenly evidence, not paperwork. His smile was gone. His jaw worked once, as if he was trying to reset his face into something that would make sense. Russell's voice carried without effort, even though he wasn't on the microphone. "You," he said, addressing Michael, "are standing in a room that only looks like it belongs to you." Michael's brow tightened. I don't know what you think you're doing, Michael said, forcing steadiness into his tone. This is a board proceeding. This is private. Russell let the words hang for a second. Then he nodded slightly, like he'd heard the argument and already filed it away as irrelevant. He lifted his cane and pointed, not at Michael's chest, but at the long table where the chairman's tablet sat. One of Russell's associates stepped forward and placed a slim black folder on the table. Another set down a tablet beside it, screen already lit. The chairman looked at it like he was afraid to touch it. Russell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Harrow and Slate's stability, he said, has never been independent. He glanced at the chairman. Open it. The chairman hesitated, then reached out with both hands as if the folder might bite him. He opened it carefully, like a man handling something fragile. The first page was visible even from where I sat. Neat headers, dense paragraphs, numbers. The chairman's eyes moved left to right, then stopped, then went back. His face drained gradually, like the blood was leaving in stages. Michael leaned forward, trying to see. What is that? He asked. Russell didn't answer right away. He watched the chairman read. He let the process do the work. Then he said, evenly, a financing agreement, debt holdings, control provisions. The chairman's hand trembled slightly as he turned a page. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, No. Vivian's lips parted, and I saw her eyes flick to Michael, searching for reassurance he couldn't give. Michael's voice sharpened. I'm the CEO. This was approved by... Russell's gaze didn't move. He cut in without raising his tone. You are the CEO, he said, for a few more minutes. The chairman lifted his head, eyes wide. He looked from the folder to Russell, then to Michael, and his throat worked like he was trying to speak around something heavy. Russell nodded toward the tablet. One of the associates tapped the screen, and the chairman's tablet refreshed to a document page with highlighted sections. Russell spoke like he was reading a weather report. 60% of Harrow and Slate's leveraged debt is held through Vail Capital entities, he said, and the agreement contains a stability clause. Michael blinked hard, like he didn't understand the words in the order they were being said. That's not possible, he said. I would have known. Russell's expression didn't change. You would have known, he said, if you had bothered to read beyond the signature page. The chairman's voice came out thin. The clause, he said, staring at the tablet. It's here. Michael turned toward him sharply. What clause? The chairman swallowed. The one tied to reputational instability, he said. Public scandal, abrupt dissolution of the primary household, the marriage. The room went dead quiet again. Michael's eyes flicked toward me for the first time in a different way. Not with annoyance, with calculation. He understood enough now to be afraid, but not enough to know where it ended. Russell's gaze shifted briefly to me, just a glance. And in that glance, I felt something settle into place. Not anger, order. Russell spoke again, calmly. The moment you chose to stage this, he said to Michael, you triggered the clause. Michael's hand tightened around the divorce papers. The manila envelope creased under his grip. I stayed where I was, still, watching him try to catch up to a process that had already moved past him. Then Russell's associate leaned toward the chairman and said something quietly, pointing to a timestamp on the tablet. The chairman's eyes widened again. He looked up, voice barely above a whisper. It's already executed, he said. Michael's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Russell turned his head slightly toward me, and without any emotion in his voice, like it was just the next item on a list, he said, Stand up, Claire. I placed my phone in my clutch. I smoothed the fabric of my dress once, slowly, and rose from my chair. Then I waited. Standing felt different than I expected, not empowering in a movie way, just practical, like moving from the passenger seat to the driver's side because the person holding the wheel suddenly couldn't. Michael stared at me as if he was seeing me for the first time, but I didn't give him anything to read. I kept my face neutral and my shoulders relaxed. Russell didn't touch my arm. He didn't guide me. He simply stood beside the row, cane planted, waiting, letting the room understand that time had shifted. Michael tried to speak again, and this time he aimed for certainty. "This is a hostile interference," he said. "You can't just walk in here and—" The chairman cut him off, voice tight. "Michael, stop." That surprised him more than Russell's presence. The chairman wasn't a dramatic person. He was careful by nature. So when he spoke sharply, it meant the paperwork was worse than anyone wanted it to be. Michael turned toward the table. "Show me." The chairman hesitated, then slid the folder across, not to Michael, toward Russell's associate. It was a small detail, but I noticed it. In this room, objects moved toward whoever held authority. That's how you could measure it. Russell's associate opened the folder flat and angled it so Russell could see. Then he tapped the tablet again, and the screen showed a clean timeline. Dates, clauses, triggers, execution confirmations. It looked like something built for court, not conversation. Michael leaned forward. His attorney moved with him, lips pressed together, eyes scanning fast. Michael's mother finally found her voice, thin and uneven. "This is ridiculous," Vivian said. "Michael is the CEO. You can't—" Russell didn't even look at her. He didn't have to. The room had stopped treating her as a speaker. I felt my phone against the inside of my clutch and made a quiet decision. No more reacting, only organizing. I have a way of doing it when things start slipping, turning emotion into sequence. Not because I'm cold, because sequence keeps you from making mistakes. So I ran it like steps in my head. Step 1. Confirm what is real in writing, not in opinions. Step 2. Identify who currently holds authority to act. Step 3. Stabilize the environment so nothing disappears. Documents, devices, access. I kept my voice calm when I spoke, and I didn't raise it toward the microphone. I addressed the chairman because he was the procedural center of the room. "Mr. Kessler," I said. He looked at me quickly, like he wasn't sure what name to use for me now. "Yes, Claire." "Please confirm," I said, "whether the execution notice is already recorded in the board system. Not verbally, I mean in the official record." He swallowed and turned the tablet toward himself again. His finger scrolled. Then he nodded once. "It is," he said. "Time stamped." Michael's attorney held out a hand. "We need to see that execution confirmation." Russell's associate didn't argue. He simply rotated the tablet slightly, enough for the attorney to read, not enough for him to touch. The attorney's eyes moved across the screen. I saw the moment he reached the line that mattered because his shoulders dropped a fraction. Michael noticed too. "What does it say?" Michael asked, voice tightening. The attorney didn't answer right away. He was choosing words the way lawyers do when they can't lie, but want to soften the impact. "It indicates," he said carefully, "that the creditor's rights were activated upon public initiation of marital dissolution under circumstances defined as destabilizing." Michael looked at him, blinking hard. "That's not—" "It's executed," the attorney repeated, quieter this time. "Already." Michael's mouth opened again, and then he did something telling. He looked around the room for allies, for the familiar faces that used to nod along. But most of them had gone still. A few were looking at Russell with the kind of professional caution reserved for storms. Not personal, just aware of damage. I shifted my attention to the security guard near the door, the one Michael had just instructed. He stood frozen, eyes flicking between Russell's men and the board. I spoke to him gently, like I was speaking to someone doing a job. "It's all right," I said. "No one needs to be escorted right now." He didn't move, but his shoulders eased slightly. He was relieved someone competent had given him a simple instruction. Then I looked at Michael. Not with anger, with clarity. "You asked me to sign," I said. "I did." Michael's jaw clenched. And you announced it publicly, I continued, in a room where contracts matter. He started to speak, but I lifted one hand slightly, not to silence him, just to mark my pace. I'm not debating you, I said. I'm documenting what happened. That was the shift. I felt it in myself. The moment where it stopped being personal and became procedural. I turned back to the chairman. I want the meeting minutes to reflect, I said, that the divorce papers were presented and demanded for signature in a public board setting. The chairman nodded quickly. Yes. And I want a copy of the executed financing agreement and the clause trigger notice sent to the company's general counsel, I said. Tonight. The chairman looked at Russell, then back at me. Yes, he said again, and his tone had changed. More formal now, like he was already updating his internal map of power. Michael took a step toward me, voice low. Claire, he said, and for the first time tonight, there was something close to panic in it. What are you doing? I met his eyes. I'm following the rules you ignored, I said. It wasn't meant to hurt. It was simply true. Vivian stood up abruptly, chair scraping. You can't take his company, she snapped, finally letting emotion spill. This is insane. This is... Russell's cane tapped once, a soft sound that cut through her words. One of Russell's men moved 2 steps forward, not aggressive, just present. Vivian stopped speaking mid-sentence. It was quiet again. I looked down at the manila envelope Michael had dropped into my lap. It was still on the side table where I'd placed it, like an artifact from a different version of tonight. Then I made the next decision. Step 4. Freeze access. I turned to Russell's associate. Do we have the access letters prepared? He nodded once. Yes. He reached into the slim black folder and pulled out 2 sealed documents, one addressed to the CFO, one to the head of IT governance. Clean envelopes, printed labels, no drama. I didn't open them. I didn't need to. The existence of them told me this wasn't improvised. Michael watched the envelopes like they were weapons. What is that? He asked. Notifications, I said. Standard procedure. His attorney stepped forward again, trying to regain footing. We need to confer, he said. You can't make operational changes without... The board can, the chairman said quietly. And that was the final crack. He cleared his throat and looked down at the tablet again. As of the execution timestamp, he said, the controlling creditor entity holds voting authority sufficient to appoint interim leadership and restrict access pending review. Michael stared at him. Interim leadership? The chairman's eyes flicked to me, then away. He looked uncomfortable saying it out loud, but he said it anyway. Yes, he said. Interim. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just nodded once, as if confirming a box on a checklist. Then this is what happens next, I said, still calm. Tonight, we secure records. No deletions, no transfers, no cleanup. I looked at the chairman to ensure he understood the wording. He nodded. Agreed. Tomorrow morning, I continued, we conduct a controlled review. Finance first, then legal, then operations. I paused and added, and until that review is complete, no one leaves this building with company devices or files. Michael's face tightened. That's ridiculous, he said, voice strained. You have personal property, I said evenly. Company property stays. The room stayed quiet. Russell didn't interrupt me. He didn't step in front of me. He simply let me speak, like he'd been waiting for me to remember the exact shape of my own voice. The chairman glanced toward his assistant, who was already typing rapidly. I realized then that my hands were steady. My breath was steady. The shaking had moved to other people. Michael's attorney leaned in and whispered something to him urgently. Michael didn't answer. He kept staring at me like he was trying to find the version of me he could manipulate. But that version had been built for survival, not for this. Russell leaned slightly toward me, voice low. Come, he said. We'll review the documents upstairs before anyone tries anything clever. I gave the chairman one last instruction. I want the full audit logs pulled, I said. Email access, document access, finance approvals from the last 12 months. The chairman nodded. Yes. Then I picked up my clutch, slow and deliberate, and stepped away from the front row. Russell walked beside me. His cane tapped lightly as we moved toward the side exit. Behind us, I heard Michael call my name once. Sharper, desperate. I didn't turn. I followed Russell through the quieter corridor, away from the chandelier and the cameras, and into a small executive office where the lights were softer and the air smelled like paper and coffee. Russell closed the door. He placed the folder on the desk. I sat down, opened it, and started reading. The executive office was quiet in a way the boardroom never was. No applause, no glass clinking. Just the low hum of the building and the soft tick of a wall clock that had probably been there longer than most of the people in that meeting. Russell stood by the window for a moment, looking down at the street like he was checking traffic, not history. One of his associates stayed near the door, hands folded, eyes alert but calm. I opened the folder on the desk and read without rushing. The first page was a summary sheet, clear headings, percentages, entities, dates. I didn't read it like a story. I read it like a system. The debt holdings were routed through 3 layers, standard for anyone who didn't want their name on a headline. The stability clause was highlighted, with cross-references to the board governance policy. And there it was, in plain language. Public dissolution of the primary household bond, under defined destabilizing conditions, allowed immediate protective control measures. There were also attachments, receipts for capital injections, confirmation letters from banking intermediaries, and a record of the legal notice already served to Harrow and Slate's general counsel. I felt a familiar calm settle in. Not relief, not triumph, just alignment. Russell turned from the window. You understand it, he said. I do, I replied. He nodded once, then pointed gently with the cane toward the bottom of the page. And you see that timestamp? Yes. Good, he said, because it means we don't argue, we execute. A soft knock came at the door. Russell's associate opened it just enough to speak. Mr. Kessler is asking for direction, he said. They want to reconvene in the small conference room, no cameras. Russell looked at me, not as a test, just as a check-in. I want it documented, I said, and I want company counsel in the room. They're on their way, the associate said. Russell's eyes stayed on mine. And Michael? The associate answered before I did. He's in the corridor with his attorney. He's insisting. Russell's mouth didn't change shape, but I could tell he'd expected that. I closed the folder and stood. I didn't smooth my dress this time. I didn't need to. I just picked up the summary page and the highlighted clause sheet. 2 pieces. Enough. We walked down the corridor to a smaller conference room tucked away from the main board space. The lighting was warmer, the table less theatrical. It was the kind of room where decisions actually happened, not where they were celebrated. Mr. Kessler was already there, seated stiffly. The general counsel arrived 2 minutes later, hair slightly out of place, carrying a laptop and a legal pad like she'd been pulled from another fire. She introduced herself quickly. Dana Holloway, she said, voice steady. General counsel. I nodded. Claire. Russell sat at the far end of the table, cane resting against his chair. One associate stood near the wall, not looming, just present. Then the door opened again. Michael walked in with his attorney. He looked different away from the chandelier. The tux was the same, but the confidence wasn't. His movements were tighter now, like he was trying to hold his posture together by force. Vivian came in behind him, eyes bright with anger, carrying her shock like it was a handbag she wanted everyone to see. Michael took the chair opposite me. His attorney sat beside him, already flipping open a binder. For a moment, no one spoke. I didn't fill the silence. I let it work. Michael's attorney started first, aiming for formality. "We're contesting the validity of any immediate transfer of voting authority," he said, "and we object to any restriction of Mr. Hale's access without due process." Dana Holloway didn't react emotionally. She simply opened her laptop and said, "On what basis?" "On the basis that the clause is unconscionable and," the attorney began. I set the 2 pages I'd carried onto the table in front of me and slid them forward, not toward Michael, but toward Dana. "Can you confirm these match what you received tonight?" I asked her. Dana read the headers, then nodded once. "Yes." "And can you confirm," I continued, "that the execution notice has been logged through corporate governance?" She checked something quickly, then looked up. "It has." I turned my attention to Michael's attorney, calm and direct. "So we're not debating whether it exists," I said. "We're only discussing your reaction to it." Michael's jaw tightened. "Claire?" I held my gaze on him for a second, then moved past it. "This is what will happen next," I said, still even. "Dana will initiate the preservation order. Finance will pull the last 12 months of approvals and ledger changes. It will preserve access logs. Your objections can be filed in writing." Vivian leaned forward, voice sharp. "Who do you think you are to sit there and speak like that?" I didn't look at her right away. I kept my eyes on Michael. Then I looked at Vivian. "I'm the person whose signature you demanded in public," I said. "And I'm the person whose name is tied to the creditor entity controlling your board." Vivian's face flushed. "That's nonsense." Russell spoke for the first time in the room, voice quiet but heavy. "It's not nonsense," he said. "It's paperwork." Michael's attorney tried to regain footing. "Even if the creditor holds a percentage of debt, that doesn't automatically grant operational authority," Dana responded, professional and clean. "It does under a covenant with voting control provisions, and the clause is drafted with enforcement language." Michael's attorney opened his binder and pointed at a paragraph. "We'll seek emergency relief. This is a bad faith trigger." I nodded once, as if he'd told me the weather might change. "Do what you need to do," I said, "but it won't change what was recorded tonight." Michael's eyes stayed fixed on me. "You planned this," he said, voice low. I didn't correct the emotion in his tone. I corrected the facts. "I didn't plan your choice," I said. "I planned for your instability." His attorney's pen paused. Michael's throat worked. "You're saying I'm unstable?" "I'm saying you staged a public termination of your marriage as a display," I replied. "In a room governed by contracts. That's the definition in the clause." Vivian let out a tight laugh that didn't sound like laughter. "She's threatening you," she said to Michael, like she could pull him back into old roles. I didn't engage it. Instead, I turned to Dana. "Preservation order," I said. "Effective immediately. Include email, finance systems, and document repositories." Dana nodded. "Understood." Michael's attorney lifted a hand. "We object." Dana didn't look up. "Objection noted." Michael pushed back slightly in his chair, trying to find leverage. "You can't take everything," he said. "I built this company." I met his eyes. "You built a story," I said. "The company is built on agreements." He shook his head once, more to himself than to me. "You're doing this because you're hurt." I didn't move. I didn't soften. I didn't harden either. "I'm doing this because it's necessary," I said. "There's a difference." Russell's associate stepped forward and placed a single-page notice on the table in front of Michael and his attorney. "Access restriction notice," he said calmly. "Company devices remain on premises. Credentials will be temporarily suspended pending review." Michael stared at the page like it was an insult. His attorney read it faster, then looked up at Dana. "You'll regret this." Dana's expression didn't change. "If your client has nothing to hide, it will be brief." Michael's hands closed into fists on the table, then released. He looked down, then back up at me. "Tell me what you want," he said, and the tone was different now, less command, more bargaining. I didn't bargain. "I want a clean review," I said, "and I want the truth to stay intact while we do it." The room was quiet again. Vivian's breathing was audible now, quick and shallow. Michael's attorney was already making notes, preparing his next move. I looked at the wall clock. Not because I was in a hurry, because timelines matter. "Dana," I said, "how long until IT confirms the preservation lock is active?" Dana checked her phone. "They're initiating it now. 10 minutes for confirmation." I nodded. "Then we wait," I said. And I placed my hands flat on the table, still, while the rest of the room learned how silence can be a decision. 10 minutes passed the way they usually do when a system is locking down, quiet on the surface, busy underneath. No one in the room spoke much. Dana typed. Michael's attorney whispered into his phone once, then stopped when he realized nobody was reacting to pressure. Vivian sat rigidly, hands clasped too tightly, eyes moving between faces as if she could still find an ally to stand up for her. I watched the clock and listened for the smallest shifts. A footstep in the hallway, an elevator ding, a phone vibration. Then Dana's screen refreshed, and she looked up. "Preservation lock is active," she said. "Email, document repository, finance approvals, and admin logs are frozen. Any deletion attempts will generate alerts." She turned her laptop so the chairman could see the confirmation banner and the timestamp. Mr. Kessler leaned forward, read it, and nodded once. "Noted for the record." Michael exhaled through his nose like he was trying to steady himself. "This is overreach," he said, but his voice didn't carry the same certainty now. He was talking because silence scared him. Dana didn't argue. She just asked, "Do you have a corporate device on you right now?" Michael paused. His attorney answered quickly. "He has his phone. That's personal." Dana's tone stayed calm. "If it's personal, it's not coming into the company network. If it's been connected to the company network, IT will preserve the connection logs. Either way, no changes tonight." Michael's mouth tightened. Russell didn't speak. He didn't have to. The process was doing what it was designed to do. A soft knock came at the door. An assistant stepped in and spoke to Dana quietly. Dana nodded and said, "Send them in." Two people entered, the interim CFO, a man in a gray suit with tired eyes, and the head of internal audit, a woman carrying a thin binder and a tablet. They both looked like they'd been pulled out of bed and told to come quickly, but their posture changed when they saw Russell in the room. The CFO cleared his throat. "Mr. Kessler," he said, "we pulled what we could immediately after the preservation order. It's preliminary." "Go ahead," the chairman said. The audit lead placed the binder on the table and opened it to a page with a simple list. No dramatic language, just entries, dates, vendors, amounts, approvals. She slid the binder toward Dana first, then toward the chairman, keeping the motion controlled. "These are transactions flagged by our system in the last 12 months, she said. "Some were previously cleared under executive override. We pulled them again with the override history attached." Michael leaned forward as if his body moved before his pride could stop it. Vivian did too. I didn't. I waited until the binder reached the chairman, then spoke to the audit lead. "Are these confirmed or still pending?" I asked. "Confirmed as posted," she said. "Pending as to classification and justification." The CFO added, "We also pulled the approval chain. Several are signed off under CEO-level discretionary categories." Michael's attorney immediately went into defense. "Executive discretionary spend is standard. That's not misconduct." Dana didn't look up. "It can still be misclassification. Keep going." The audit lead turned a page. Item 1, $148,000 over 6 months for operational travel, she said. Vendor is an air charter service. Flights include Aspen, Napa, and Palm Beach. Passenger manifests show family travel, not client travel. Vivian's face hardened. "That's private. You can't..." Dana cut in, calm. It's company spend. It's reviewable. The audit lead continued. Item 2, $62,500 to a consulting entity listed as Market Strategy. The entity is newly formed. Its registered agent is connected to a family trust under Ms. Hale's name. Vivian's head snapped toward the audit lead. That's... Russell's cane tapped once, softly. Vivian stopped talking mid-word. The audit lead didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the paper. Item 3, a retention bonus distribution approved outside the standard compensation cycle, she said. 2 recipients are personal acquaintances. No HR documentation attached. The CFO spoke again, careful. There are also expense reimbursements tied to a personal residence renovation. They were coded as security upgrades. We can't confirm a security contract. The invoices appear to be from a general contractor. Michael's face had gone still in a way that told me he was trying to hold himself together by force. This is ridiculous, he said. You're cherry-picking line items. I finally leaned forward slightly, not to argue, just to clarify. Do you have documentation to support these as company expenses? I asked. Michael stared at me. I don't need to justify, Dana answered for the room. You do now. The chairman took a slow breath and looked at Dana. What's the immediate recommendation? Dana's voice stayed neutral. Administrative suspension of CEO authority pending full review. Appoint an interim executive. Notify insurers and external auditors. Issue litigation, hold notices. And restrict facility access until we complete the first audit pass. The chairman nodded as if he'd expected it, then looked down at the binder again. Michael's attorney pushed back his chair slightly. You're talking about removing a sitting CEO based on preliminary flags. The chairman didn't look at him. He looked at Russell for a moment, then at me. Then he spoke. This board has an obligation to stabilize the company, he said. And the control provisions have shifted authority tonight. That's not an opinion. He turned to Dana. Draft the resolution. Dana typed for a few seconds. Then she read it aloud, simple and formal. It named the authority basis, the timestamp, the interim chain of command, and the scope of the review. It included language about preserving records and preventing retaliation. No one raised their voice. No one made speeches. Michael's attorney objected again for the record. Dana noted it without looking up. Then the chairman asked for the vote. Hands went up one by one around the smaller table. Not enthusiastically, not triumphantly, just procedurally. People choosing the least dangerous option, stability. When the last vote was counted, the chairman exhaled. Resolution passes, he said. Effective immediately. Michael blinked hard as if his eyes were drying out. That's it? He said, voice quieter now. After everything I did? No one answered the emotional question. Dana simply slid a printed notice across the table, already prepared, already formatted. Your access is suspended pending review, she said. You'll be contacted through counsel. Michael didn't take the paper. His attorney did, fingers tight. Vivian stood up abruptly, chair scraping again. This is a setup, she said, voice sharp. You're humiliating him. I looked at her calmly. No, I said. What happened earlier was humiliation. This is governance. She stared at me like she wanted me to flinch. I didn't. The head of internal audit closed her binder carefully, as if closing a file was a boundary. The CFO avoided eye contact with Michael, not out of cruelty, but out of the kind of discomfort people feel when someone falls in a way that becomes contagious. Russell finally spoke, not to Michael, but to the security lead who had been waiting outside the room. Escort Mr. Hale and Ms. Hale to collect personal items, Russell said. No company devices, no file access, 1 bag each, then out. The security lead nodded, relieved to have clear instructions. Michael's attorney started to stand. We need time, Dana answered, even. You'll have time through the courts, not through the network. Michael stood slowly. He looked at me again, and for a second I saw something underneath the anger. Confusion, maybe. Like he couldn't understand how the ground had shifted without him noticing the tremors. "Claire," he said, quieter, "is this what you wanted?" I kept my voice low and steady. "I wanted a normal life," I said. "You made that impossible tonight." He swallowed and looked away. Vivian said nothing as security approached. Her jaw was tight, her breathing shallow, like she was trying to keep control through sheer will. They left the room with the security lead. No shouting, no dragging, just the sound of footsteps moving down a corridor and disappearing. When the door closed, the room felt lighter, not emotionally, mechanically, like a machine had stopped vibrating. The chairman rubbed his forehead once and looked at Dana. "Next steps?" he asked. Dana replied, "We notify the external auditors before morning. We issue the litigation hold. We schedule the interim executive appointment, and we begin the structured review at 8:09 a.m. I nodded once. "And we secure the physical records," I added. "Anything in Michael's former office, contracts, handwritten notes, backup drives." Dana looked at Russell's associate. "Can your team handle that tonight?" He nodded. "Already moving." The chairman looked at me with something careful in his expression now, respect mixed with caution. "Ms. Vale," he said, and it was the first time he used the name in this room. "Will you be present in the morning meeting?" "Yes," I said, "with counsel." Russell tapped the cane lightly against the floor and stood. "Come," he said to me, simple. "You'll want rest before the morning." We stepped back into the corridor. The building felt different now, not friendly, just aligned. People moved with purpose instead of performance. Quiet voices, quick steps, doors opening and closing with intent. In the elevator, Russell handed me a thin packet, freshly printed pages clipped at the top. "First pull from finance," he said, "just enough to begin." I took it, looked at the top line, and saw the timestamps and approval codes. I didn't react. I just held it, steady, as the elevator descended. When the doors opened at the lower level, the air was cooler, the kind that makes you aware you've been under bright lights too long. Russell walked beside me toward the waiting car. I sat down in the back seat, placed the packet on my lap, and read the first page again, slowly this time. Then I closed it, set it face down, and leaned my head back against the seat. 8 a.m., I said softly, more to myself than to anyone else. And then I stayed quiet the rest of the ride. I slept for a few hours, not because I felt safe, but because my body finally understood it was allowed to stop bracing. In the morning, I woke up before my alarm. The room was still dim, the kind of quiet you only get before a city fully turns on. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my feet find the floor. No rushing, no checking my phone, just one slow breath, then another. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on and watched the small blue flame hold steady. That was my first reset, something simple I could control. When the water boiled, I made tea the way I always do. No special ceremony. Mug, bag, hot water. I set the phone face down on the counter while it steeped. The morning meeting happened exactly at 8 a.m., like a train schedule. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Dana led the agenda. Internal audit presented a timeline. The interim executive appointment was confirmed. External auditors were notified. A litigation hold went out. People asked careful questions in careful voices, mostly about exposure and continuity. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody tried to tell a story. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I said. "I'm here to stabilize the company and preserve the record. That's it." They nodded. They understood that language. By late morning, the first review findings were being packaged for counsel. Not gossip, not whispers. Documents, numbers, logs. Michael didn't contact me directly. His attorney did, once, in a short email that tried to sound strong. Dana replied, I didn't. There was nothing to add. The most surprising part, if I'm honest, was what I felt when the day finally ended. Not victory, not satisfaction, just quiet. That night, I went back to the apartment Michael and I had shared, but I didn't go in like someone returning home. I went in like someone finishing a task. I opened the windows first. Fresh air. Then I walked room to room with a small notebook and made a list. The same way I always do when life gets messy. Keep, donate, leave for counsel. I didn't take everything. I took what was mine. My passport, my laptop, a few clothes, a framed photo of my mother, a small wooden box my father gave me years ago that I'd never opened in front of anyone. I left the expensive things behind without touching them. They didn't feel like mine, and I didn't want them to. Before I locked the door, I wiped the kitchen counter clean with a paper towel. It was an odd detail, but it mattered. It was my way of closing a chapter without leaving residue. Then I walked out, pulled the door shut, and felt my shoulders drop as the latch clicked. A week later, the company was steadier. The audit was ongoing. The board meetings became routine. There were no surprise speeches, no chandelier moments, just work, decisions, and boundaries. Russell and I had dinner one evening in a quiet place with plain food and soft lighting. He didn't ask me how I felt in big emotional terms. He asked me whether I'd changed my passwords, whether my accounts were secure, whether I'd slept. He was never the kind of father who offered comfort with words. He offered it by removing risks. On the drive home, he said something that stayed with me. You don't need to prove anything now, he said. Just live in a way that's clean. That became my rule. Clean choices, clear records, calm tone. One afternoon not long after, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman I'd met years ago through a charity board, someone who had always seemed composed, almost too composed. Her text was short and careful. Hi, Claire. I heard what happened. I'm not sure who to talk to. Can I ask you something privately? I stared at it for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I recognized the pattern in the words, the way people write when they've been trained to stay quiet. I didn't answer right away. I made tea first. I sat down at my table. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 lines. What's the question? What's the risk? What's the record? Then I picked up my phone and replied calmly, Of course. Tell me what's going on. And that's when I realized something I hadn't named until then. I wasn't returning to who I was before Michael. I was becoming who I was always meant to be, someone who keeps things steady, who reads the fine print, who helps people find the exit without panic. If you've been listening this far, thank you for sitting with me through it. If you'd like more true, calm stories like this, where the truth comes out through steps, records, and quiet decisions, please tap like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. 2 popular stories will be appearing next, and I think you'll want to hear both.